My name's Jennifer Carignan. I'm with Louisiana Save Our Schools. I'm actually the founder, and so shocking, I'm also the president, right? We are a very simple organization. We focus on education. We focus on the educational system here in Louisiana, and we have two pillars: truth, transparency. We believe that that covers everything that we need to be concerned about, and the reason is because transparency lets you see the truth, and truth, when it's spoken to the public, allows you to act. It's that basic. When we hide things, we always end up with corruption. I mean, that's kind of where we stand on things. So, we believe in truth and transparency. We are a statewide organization. We work primarily at this point at the policy level. That means we work with decision makers at the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, the Department of Education, the legislature, and in local areas at school boards in the parishes. However, we focus on the state level because there are other advocates around the state who are deeply connected to their communities, and so we try to provide resources to them and be there for them. And focus on what we've been really successful at. Where did we begin? We began with the social studies standard. We fought really hard alongside many people from Louisiana to make sure the people's voice was represented, not just the vendors. And it meant that the standard came to reflect, we believe, a balance of both what both sides wanted, but truth. And that really is one of the things we believe in. We don't believe that you should ignore something that happened in history because it makes you uncomfortable. If it happened, it needs to be dealt with and taught. But we do believe in, again, that manner of truth and transparency, that the classroom is no place for political ideology of any kind. Okay, so how does education really work? Does anybody have any thoughts? One sentence? One word? Not very well. Broken, okay. I'm here to tell you, and I bet you know this answer, you just didn't want to say it. It functions on money. Okay, right? It's what makes the world go around these days. Money is the core of our education system for a lot of reasons. One, because vendors, okay, those are companies, right? So we call them vendors. Vendors bring money into the educational system. They don't just cost money. They supply money to primarily organizations like the Louisiana School Board Association. Oh, lots of money flows to them from vendors. And then, who do you think they give preference to? So, another place money comes in. Well, let's start at the top. The federal government. The federal government, even when we're not in the middle of COVID, brings millions and millions and millions of dollars. It's a breathtaking amount to every school system in this state. Your schools would shut down without the federal government's money. Why? Do they need the money? Or have they made themselves dependent on it? Well, it's kind of a chicken and egg question, but I have an opinion. I'll let you form your own. The state also supplies money through the MFP. That's the money that is allocated basically per pupil in a school system, right? That money supplements local money, property taxes. Okay, so money, lots of money going around. How do we end up with the problems we have in our educational system? Money. To get that money, you have to meet conditions. Who do you think has the most conditions? The federal government. And they take the money and they divide it into different streams of funding. And some of those streams of funding have more requirements than others. So you can choose one stream of funding and maybe not run into too many problems. But if you choose another one, you're going to have to meet all kinds of requirements, perhaps some distasteful things. That's how education works. So what can we do about it? Well, again, I would say the very first thing we need to do about it is actually know what's happening. We need truth and transparency. So we're going to talk about some very specific problems, some very specific topics in the education system. I'm going to say 3 words, and I'm going to see if any of these sound familiar to you. SEL, Title IX, or ESSER. If SEL sounds familiar to you, would you raise your hand for me, just so I have some sense? Oh, beautiful. Okay. How about Title IX? Oh, that just warms my heart. Sorry, I'm banging the microphone, but it just makes me so happy. What about ESSER? Oh, okay. All right. So it's Missy and Lindsay. Do either one of you want to give me a quick thought on what you think of ESSER? When you hear the word ESSER, what does it bring to mind?
Specific funds from the federal government dependent on them following, the contract that they signed, their name,
100%.
Whatever it is. I don't know if it's real quick. Both of our kids go to private schools, so we're also. It's like all this applies to us.
It
but
does.
It seems
it's
a
vaguer.
little. Right. Mm-hmm. And they pretend that it's all private, but
it's not.
I know that they take
They get federal money, they get state money, they get MFP money.
But you think that it's maddening. So that's my
okay. That's really good. That's exactly it. So ESSA is the Every Student Succeeds Act. That was the follow-up to No Child Left Behind. Anytime they name these acts like that, it's going to accomplish everything, we should all just go, just get rid of it now. Because here's the thing, you can't guarantee that kind of result, so why do we even pretend? Anyway, that's philosophical. ESSA. And then underneath ESSA, which came in under President Obama, okay, look now. I know we all love to jump on one bandwagon, but I'm just here to tell you that one of the biggest problems we have in public education today is something called subgroups, where we group people into these little categories in the schools. That came in under No Child Left Behind. Okay, so it didn't all start with ESSA. ESSA has a whole bunch of different funding streams. Some of them have an R at the end of them, some of them have an ER, but basically it's all federal monies. And it is the governing legislation, the governing act that the entire Department of Education falls under. Okay? Yeah, wouldn't I like that? Yes. Title IX is also federal and was responsible for a lot of really good things at one point in time. It really opened the door to fuller participation by, for instance, young female athletes in their high schools and colleges. Okay, so then why are we concerned about it?
Because it allows men to go into women's.
So under President Obama in 2000, I think it was 13, I'd have to look back, there was a Dear Colleague letter that went out. And it told the schools in the education system across the country that they were going to make all these changes if they wanted to stay in compliance with Title IX. And if you take federal funds as an education institution, you must be in compliance with Title IX. That's its parameters. Well, that letter basically did all the stuff that you would imagine. It said that the meaning of sex was different, that we need to be worried about discrimination based on a whole bunch of new categories for people and students, and it got taken to court because one of the things that it resulted in is teachers losing their jobs because they wouldn't use the preferred pronouns of a student. It would be against their deeply held beliefs. I think that's in the Second Amendment. But yeah, so in our Bill of Rights we have a First Amendment. We have a I love the Second Amendment, so I get confused. In the First Amendment, we have this right to a freedom of religion. So if you have a deeply held belief, right, that's supposed to trump a lot of other things. But we had teachers losing their jobs left and right under that Dear Colleague letter. We also had school systems that were found to be out of compliance and ordered to institute all these new policies to prevent the discrimination that was happening, and so on and so forth, and it got stopped. Because, see, you can't do that kind of stuff with just a letter. President Trump became into office. Betsy DeVos went through an extensive process to create something they call the 2020 rule, which really restored what people believe was a more appropriate way of handling, for instance, discrimination, harassment complaints at the college level. Because prior, under President Obama's Dear Colleague letter, you had something called the preponderance of evidence standard. That is the same standard that you have in civil court. But you had students whose entire future was on the line, and they were basically tried in kangaroo courts at their schools. Do I want to stop bad things from happening to young women? Yes, but not in an illegal, unconstitutional way. So here's the thing. The 2020 rule restored those things to the proper posture, and now we have President Obama. So what's happened? I'm going to do this really fast. Don't feel like if you can't keep up, it's a problem. We'll talk about it after with questions. First day in office, President Biden issued an executive order. Sorry. So he issued an executive order. That executive order ordered all federal agencies to review their policies, procedures, and regulations and institute a system of equity and blah, 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 blah. Many of the things that were intended to be included were in the definitions section, so they were hidden. But basically, this was the beginning of what we are looking at now. Since then, he has signed multiple executive orders that have pushed the envelope, and we're starting to see the results now in Title IX. Title IX, as a proposal, is so extensive. It is like somewhere between 600 and 900 pages, this new proposal. And it begins with a case that the Supreme Court decided in 2020 called Bostock versus Clayton County. Bostock versus Clayton County dealt with Title VII, which is the employment regulations, employment being free of discrimination. And what Bostock did is it said you couldn't fire somebody for being transgender or gay or that sort of thing. And it took the principle basically under Title VII that under in employment, especially most of the employees in those cases were in public employment, you couldn't do that. But what the Biden administration did is, even though the court said it was not to be applied to Title IX, they did that anyway. So Title IX starts with the redefinition of sex. Don't mean what it used to mean.
Redefinition of what?
Redefinition of the meaning of sex. Oh, okay. That is the entire basis of Title IX. It has always been binary, male, female. Now it includes the idea basically that gender is fluid. So it encompasses all of that philosophy. It says, among other problematic areas, that we're returning to the preponderance of evidence standard, those kangaroo courts, that a school, if they have a discrimination complaint, which can now be filed on gender identity or systemic racism or all kinds of different areas, but if they have a complaint of discrimination, even if in the hearing it is found to be not valid, the school has to institute a procedure to prevent such discrimination from happening in the future. Just wrap your head around the logic of that for a minute. Yeah, okay. So it don't make any sense. If it didn't happen, if it's not a valid complaint, why does the school have to institute policies? Well, because that's the whole goal of the legislation. Some people have told us that we're worrying about nothing. It's not going to force boys and girls to share locker rooms. But in fact, all of the people who are pushing this proposal all agree that it is exactly what it will do, because it will guarantee the right of a student or teacher to use the facility that lines up with their identity. And remember, identity is fluid. So who you are one day can change the next day. It's not as common, but it does happen, and it is happening. Yes?
One question about that. Title IX is a piece of legislation. Correct?
Yes.
Can it actually be amended by an executive order?
We're going to talk about that. So some of the other areas that it gets into, it actually provides for pregnancy discrimination and related conditions, pregnancy-related conditions. I had a good conversation with some lawyers this week on a conference call who have worked for the administrative procedures in the area of the Administrative Procedures Act, which is what Title IX falls under. It governs how things happen. And they agreed with me when I raised the concern that related conditions, pregnancy-related conditions, feels very amorphous and nebulous, and that I am deeply concerned, we are deeply concerned at Louisiana Save Our Schools, that could open the door to a vast number of interpretations as they break the first rule of defining terms and they reuse pregnancy-related conditions in the definition. So what does it mean? None of us know.
Just very quickly, isn't our Attorney General, Jeff Landry,
We will.
a big proponent for us?
Yes, and we'll go over all of that, I promise, in the pushback. So Title IX's a mess, okay? I could go on and on. Remember I said it was 600 to 900 pages? I mean, it's extensive. Social emotional learning, okay? Social emotional learning is, to me, one of the most pressing problems that we face because of what it has become. Social emotional learning used to mean a lot of different things to people. And what it used to mean was teaching kids good manners. That's what people think of it as. Folks, it hasn't been that for over 10 years. Okay? This is the definition of social emotional learning according to Castle. Castle is considered to be the preeminent authority on social emotional learning by everyone, hands down. Okay? Explicit SEL instruction, this is how they define it. Students have consistent opportunities to cultivate, practice, and reflect on social and emotional competencies in ways that are developmentally appropriate and culturally responsive. See, that's the key. What's culturally responsive?
Whatever they say it is today.
Well, let's think about this for a second. This is also from Castle from 2019. Forms of SEL and social justice implications. Personally responsible SEL, that's interpersonal justice. Participatory SEL, procedural and restorative justice. Transformative SEL, distributive or equity justice. There is a tendency for people to not want to hear that SEL is bad, that equity is bad, that culturally responsive teaching is bad. The reason that they want you to believe that is because we're in the era of redefining terms. I mean, remember we just talked about Title IX, they're redefining what sex means, folks.
You mean like recessions?
It's everywhere, isn't it? I want to set the stage for a minute. Imagine that it is Well, I won't go with a date because I think this will be easier without it. Imagine you are a young person growing up in China when Mao comes to take control. Just think about that for a minute while I describe this. The ability to accurately recognize one's own emotions, thoughts, and values from how they influence behavior. The ability to accurately assess one's strengths and limitations with a well-grounded sense of confidence, optimism, and a growth mindset. That's self-awareness. The ability to successfully regulate one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in different situations, effectively managing stress, controlling impulses, and motivating oneself. The ability to take perspective of and empathize with others, including those from diverse backgrounds and cultures. The ability to understand social and ethical norms for behavior and to recognize family, school, community resources and supports. The ability to establish and maintain healthy and rewarding relationships with diverse individuals and groups. The ability to communicate clearly, listen well, cooperate with others, resist inappropriate social pressure, negotiate conflict constructively, and seek and offer help when needed. And then finally, the ability to make constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions based on ethical standards, safety concerns, and social norms. The realistic evaluation of consequences of various actions and a consideration of the well-being of others and self. Those are the areas that SEL claims to interact in. But what do they mean? Self-awareness is being able to identify your emotions, have an accurate self-perception, recognize strength, self-confidence, self-efficacy. So if SEL and CASEL includes at all programs, because as remember the definition, CASEL now believes that SEL must include cultural competency, which includes gender identity and systemic racism being fought. I want you to think about what it means to be self-aware and know your identity in those terms from an organization that promotes those concepts.
Excuse me, but CASEL, who is that?
They are the Collaborative for Academic Success and I think it's emotional learning. But
who owns that?
Okay, it started actually with a doctor who did research at a university. I think they were in Chicago first, then they moved to the East Coast, or maybe they were in the East Coast and then they moved to Chicago. It's been around for probably 3 decades, maybe 4. It's a private organization, technically a nonprofit. The people on the board are movers and shakers of what we would consider to be the more to the left of center politically, ideologically, generally speaking. It began and the most successful experiment was done in some schools in Connecticut. So if you like,
CASEL mandated for all this?
CASEL is just considered to be the expert. And so
By who?
by not us, but by all of the public education system, the federal government, everyone. They rate the SEL programs, they define them, they label them, they are considered to be, they have taken control of SEL. SEL is also estimated to be, I think it was 700 and something million, it's almost $1 billion industry in this country.
The federal government and all the special interests own CASEL and therefore fixes it.
I don't know if the federal government really, if you can say that they own it, but we've moved towards that. Yes, because there are a lot of people in it that have gone on to the federal government. What I want you to understand is that what CASEL has done is they have moved from teaching self-control and being able to identify your emotions to a place where they now look at everything about your identity. And they start with these programs down in the preschool level, okay, where they're working with kids to help them form their identity, understand who they are, learn how to be in control of their emotions, understand who their friends are, their neighbors are, people they might not be friends with, and then how to have relationships with them. And its culmination is in what they call sort of this having a civic-minded life, okay? Everything drives towards having the youth voice recognized and having children be engaged in creating change, both in their schools and in their communities.
So that's the purpose?
That is the purpose. The purpose of it...
It sounded like the purpose is transhumanism.
Well, I think it is... The purpose of it is to change how children think. So, this book, I won't read it aloud to you because it's not story time. But this book is Jacob's Room to Choose. Jacob's Room to Choose is a beautifully illustrated book for young children. It is, from the colors and style, the kind of book I would have chosen in a heartbeat for my children when they were young, but not the topic. The topic is a very young child deciding to become a social activist at their school because both Jacob and Sophie are actually identifying as the opposite sex from what their bodies would say. And they complain that the bathrooms are not accessible to them. This is written for very young children. What happens when you provide materials like that to very young children? When you read them stories like this, young children are forming their identity. They are becoming self-aware. And you can guide them to a different reality.
Reading from Cassie.
These are recommended books.
Why?
Many of the SEL groups, many of the reading groups. You'll find them in public libraries typically, and then in classroom libraries, which are not listed on any website. This one is all about the pronouns that people use and why it's so important to learn those. And again, this is not targeted at high school students. You can see that, right?
Sounds demonic.
Yeah.
It sounds like there was something that when you go to a movie, they used to put, it was an episode about, they show a drink, you wouldn't see it.
Subliminal messaging.
Yeah, it's not even close to
I like that. It's very
That was just box.
This is when Kayla was Kyle. This is all about, the journey of a young person becoming the other sex. So those are for young people. Everybody always says, well, but do we have these books in our schools? Yes.
Is it Tammany?
Yes. This book is ELA, English Learning Arts, Language Arts, curriculum for 8th graders in the public school system. But if you were doing distance learning, this is not the book that came home. There were 2 choices, and the distance learning book was this really nice book. This is the book they do in school. This book is graphic enough that I will not read the sections to you. I'm not one of those people. I just can't do it. I would turn purple. But it does discuss in graphic detail the procedures that they undertake before executing someone, which are very graphic. There are things I didn't know. And there are scenes that refer to gang rape and other types of things all throughout it. 8.
And what's the name?
7th grade if you're at Haynes Academy in Jefferson Parish. Yes.
Can you explain to everyone what that gold seal on the front?
I don't have my glasses with me, so I don't remember for sure, but here's the thing. If you see those seals on the front of a book from your lifetime, what does that mean?
What is it?
Good stuff.
Good stuff. Yeah, you don't need to look close. Just if you see a gold seal on a book at a library, what do you think? Oh, that should be a good book. Oh, things have changed, folks. You need to look very carefully because there are some organizations that are wholly devoted to creating books that push and promote social justice, and they give awards. Okay? Blind Spot. This is actually not a horrendous book. I'm actually I have mixed feelings. This is a book that St. Tammany used for professional development. Those that reported to us going through the professional development of this book reported being very uncomfortable with some of the questions that they were asked in the book discussion group. I will tell you, given the choices, it's mild. Okay? Everybody has a blind spot. Everybody has hidden biases. Here's the problem. This is another one. This is, y'all gonna see, is another moment of, oh, really? Do you know that last name, Covey? Franklin Covey?
Yeah, sure.
And is it a positive? Right, it's a good name to you, isn't it? Okay, well, Franklin Covey's son has taken over, Sean, and I don't recommend this particular approach. This is to deal with your unconscious bias. Okay, so let's talk about that for just a real quick second. Unconscious bias, here's what they don't tell you. The studies that deal with unconscious bias all tell us that you can't eradicate it. It's just part of how we're built. But here's what intelligent people who are exposed to the world do. They recognize they have unconscious bias and they move past it and they make good decisions. But when you stifle your inner voice, you can put yourself in danger. So there's a balance, right? Okay. That's my spiel on unconscious bias. It's bad science. This book is in Fontainebleau High School's library. I don't have time to do an extensive search of our school libraries. I literally do not have time. But I assure you, there are horrendous books in our libraries, in our school libraries. There are deeply pornographic books in our school libraries. This book talks all about this page that I just randomly opened to is called Challenging the Heterosexual Matrix. It's talking all about how wrong it is to say people are only one gender. This also in here talks about gay rights, queer activism, Rubin's thinking sex, the sex hierarchy, deconstructing compulsory heterosexuality, Black feminists, multiple identities and marginalization. That's not the mental illness multiple identities, that's the intersection of your identities. So if you are a Black female, there's an intersection there of your Black identity and your female identity. Whichever one is most oppressed is the identity that you would stick with. Let's see. Kinsey, sexual diversity. Sedgwick, How to Bring Your Kids Up Gay. The Epistemology of the Closet. Nature versus Nurture. Queer Beyond Sexuality and Genders. Okay, you get the idea, I hope. There's all kinds of really interesting, they talk about collectivism in Finding Nemo. Did you know that Finding Nemo is a poster child for the non-binary gender identity movement? Yeah, I didn't know that until I read that. I was like, what? You just ruined that movie for me.
I mean, they didn't make the movie for that, so they adopted him.
Oh, yes. Yes. Queer art, guerrilla tactics, queer biology. I mean, this book is truly, yes, I'm not going to read this. I'll just hold it out. Can any of you see what that picture is?
Yes.
This is in a high school library. This is talking about, this is what it says, critical research on, I will read this, on kink or BDSM has challenged the previous sexology focus on delineating normal from abnormal forms of sex. And they go on to talk about specific acts and how they could be playful or silly and so on and so forth. You're welcome to pass it around if people want to take a peek.
So I guess
on it.
could they check this out and do a book report on it?
I'm not really sure what they do with it, but I will tell you this. None of us should think that just because we live in St. Tammany, we're safe.
Okay, so why are these books in our school? Because of the federal funding?
No. No.
Are they in the Catholic schools too?
That I don't know because I can only access so many book catalogs. Why are the books in our schools? The American Association of School Librarians has become a vending machine of liberal and woke philosophies. They literally have, in the last 6 months, 6 months ago I could still access them, they have locked down their professional development training on social justice and diversity and inclusion. But before that, you could get a peek of it. Why'd they lock it down, I wonder? They are training school librarians that you need to provide these materials because some of your students identify with these topics, and so that's good enough to put it in your school library. I have been told point blank that books that feature gang rape are acceptable because there might be a child who's experienced that. Books that are completely and totally focused on drug paraphernalia and drug abuse are okay because some children come from that background. That is the world we are living in. That is how people think. When you suggest to them that perhaps the school library should be focused on books that are rich and literature and books that support the educational experience, they just can't even conceptualize that. But they need to reflect every type of child who could walk through the door. Yes?
I have a question. I know they did it in Arizona. I don't know if they're doing it out here. Are the librarians in the school district actual librarians? Do they have a
Some of them are.
library science, or have they decided that it is just a teacher's aide, which in
No.
Arizona, teacher's aide doesn't even have to have an associate's
Right.
degree?
Some of them are, and we do have some really great school librarians in Louisiana who on their own just kind of go like this, I don't need that book. Or your parents are going to have to tell me it's okay for you to take that out. But we don't have a uniform policy, and that's in no small part because of who sits in our governor's office, because he has, in order to accept some monies, he has pushed policies out to the state library. We also have our American Association of School Librarians for Louisiana headed up by somebody who's very liberal, so that doesn't help either. There are schools where the librarian is a former teacher, but they're not, they're still very well educated people. I have very little issue with the training of the librarians as much as I do with just the movement that basically presupposes that parents do not have the right to know what their children are checking out from a school library. So if you have the right to know what curriculum your children are studying, why should you not know what books they're checking out of a school library? This is very different from a public library. We do not take issue or a position on public libraries. That's not what this is about. This is about a place where your children are going, oftentimes driven by public transportation, right? Where that with no pushback, paid for by our dollars, but with an educational purpose, and that's the pushback that we would give. So here, I've given you a lot to chew on. Usually it's about this point where people start looking at me and going, I'm not feeling very good about where things are at. And just to make sure you understand how bad it is, here's an article from the Committee for Children. That's a big organization that advocates for children on SEL, and I think even just looking at the title tells you a lot. This is Panorama. Anybody remember who Panorama is?
Is that, is it Merrick?
You're right, you're remembering.
Yes.
Merrick Garland was called on the carpet for the National Association of School Boards' request to label parents as domestic terrorists. And during the hearing, it came out that his son-in-law owns Panorama.
Right.
Panorama is, they push SEL, but the other thing that they do and that they specialize in are surveys. And every school does them, not Panorama, but they do the surveys. So, why do they do it? Because data is integral and essential to SEL. You track the data, you find out where the student's at, and then you move them into the appropriate intervention. So, if they're starting to look like they might be struggling a little bit, we move them into a tier 2 intervention where they get more intensive SEL because we wouldn't want to not be able to indoctrinate them. And then, if that fails and they're really struggling, then we not only do the intensive SEL, but we also refer them to an in-house mental health practitioner. Because there's nothing that's going to go wrong by having mental health practitioners behind the closed door of our non-transparent school system.
So they do mental health.
Oh, yes. They are licensed mental health practitioners. Yep.
They're the same ones that'll push a child that be on puberty.
I'm going to pass those
blockers
along just so
and
they
tell that
absolutely
child
are.
not to tell their parents. Maybe
They absolutely are.
I mean, it's so much worse than anything.
It's hard to go into it all because, yeah. So,
You left us standing
on a cliff.
100 mile big room waiting for re-education camps, is that what you're
Yes, I'm going to revisit that now. How do you feel about my question to take this all in as someone living, a young person living in China as Mao came into power? Does that put any of this into an interesting perspective when you think about that?
Peter Khrushchev said that they were terrorists.
I am telling you, I didn't like to say those things out loud before. I felt like people had a hard time hearing it. I don't shy away from it anymore. It's there in black and white. I've read too many white papers, too many policy briefs, that when I get done reading them, I have to call my partner, who's this beautiful woman down in Calcasieu Parish, and we sit on the phone and just like vent and cry and have horrifying. She has little children, so it's really hard for her sometimes to look at some of these things and realize what we are allowing into our schools. So here's the question for you. Yeah.
Tell us what they're doing.
They do and they don't.
No.
They do and they don't. They say they tell us. But do you know how
I
hard...
don't know what you know.
Oh, do you know why I know this? Because I have spent so much money fighting on public information requests. I can make one request in one school system, and they will go back and forth with me for 2 months before they fill it. They don't want me to know, because they know I'm going to tell everybody.
Yeah.
And they will tell me to prove it. Oh, well, we don't have a contract with that person. I remember one request I filed where I said, please provide me with the contracts and vendors for all your social emotional learning programs or anything that uses that keyword. You have to know the vendor, Mrs. Carignan, before we can provide you with those purchase orders and contracts. I said, well, there is no database of vendors in this school system. You're not a transparent school system. Well, we don't have any way to look it up. I said, are you kidding me? I know full well you can do a keyword search. I was born yesterday. So you know what I did? I went to the school board meeting of that particular parish and I did announce I read the response I got. Interestingly, I started getting my information faster.
So are all children filling out the survey, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, not necessarily the one by Panorama, although Panorama is on a short list of endorsed providers for a pilot program called Strong Systems that was put out by the Louisiana Department of Education several years ago. They are still doing it. There are now more than 22 school systems that have begun to participate in it, and the idea is that you bring in a national vendor to transform your school system into a better product. But the companies they've chosen, at least 3 of them are violently anti-racist DEI proponents, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of them actually is a diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-racism company. When you hear those words, I need you to remember what we talked about at the beginning. They are redefining terms. Those words don't mean what you would mean. Okay? I do want to move to what we can do because I want to give y'all plenty of time to ask questions.
We need hope.
And we need hope. Because this is when you start to crawl into this tunnel, it's demoralizing. Trust me, I've had some mornings sitting in the dark on my patio where, you know, I have really had some hard conversations with God. Why are you calling me to this? I don't want to do this. I can't change this. This is overwhelming. But He has called me to it. So I keep going. Here's what you can do. And you really can do a lot. You can become educated, informed. This is a brochure we put out with publicly available information from the internet, Twitter, and the IRS. Stand for Children is one of the worst offenders in Louisiana. They have a permanent seat on commissions at the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. And they believe in the following. You should embrace historical truths. In anti-racist schools, students uncover the roots of present-day injustice. You should develop a critical conscience. Anti-racist educators recognize how dominant narratives perpetuate marginalization, and so on and so forth. This is part of what we do. Part of what we do is we look for the original documents. We document who companies are, who vendors are, and occasionally when we find one that has had way too much influence, we do something like this. Did this work? Well, I can't disclose everything I know, but I can tell you this. There are certainly certain policymakers who can't even physically touch this because of the anger that Stand for Children expressed over this brochure. They can't be seen with it in their hands. We put it on the desk of every legislator. I heard legislators quote it in committees. The truth matters. You can do that. You can help us find truth. When you see something, send it to us. If you see somebody post something on Facebook or they tell you a story about something happening in a school, tell us about it. Expose it. What else can you do? These fun cards are the key to the citizen involvement at the legislature. This is an information-only card. Just means that you have information and you are not supposed to be taking a position. You fill this card out at the House when you go into a committee and you can provide information on a bill or topic. This means you support the bill. This is a powerful card, much more powerful if you speak. But let me assure you, keep it short, to the point, write it ahead of time, have it be well constructed. I mean, this is your research paper. This is your A+ presentation. You only have 3 minutes. So it's going to be well put together. Don't just tell them how you feel. Tell them why. And if you have a personal story, I'm telling you that changes legislators' minds. This means you're against the bill. Very visible. Very hard for them to miss. You also have the option to speak if you want to, or you can just indicate you're against the bill. These are very important cards. They start to give those legislators sitting on the committee a sense of what's happening in the room. But I'm telling you, if you speak, it's better.
Are you guaranteed the opportunity to
Yes.
fill out the card?
If you fill out the card, you are guaranteed the right to speak. You have 3 minutes. This is the only thing. I have had many times where they have lost my cards. So if you fill out the card, make sure that you pay attention to being called. They don't like hearing from me sometimes. This one's for Bessie. Did you know you could do the same thing at Bessie, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education? You can do the same thing there. And there's a lot of decisions that get made there. And they're much more gracious. They've never lost my card. What else can you do? Well, so you can become informed. You can go to the legislature during session. You can go to Bessie meetings. You also can go to any of the committee meetings. Any of them at Bessie. The Superintendent's Advisory Council, the Behavior and Discipline Council, the Accountability Council, there are so many it's not even funny, and you all have the right to go. And you have the right to speak if they're voting on something. Okay, that's the law. If they're voting on it, you can speak. Okay, what can you do? What else? Well, there's a big one coming up this year. And I'm pretty sure the Convention of States is going to do a little more with it. And that's school board races are happening all over this state. As a nonprofit, I'm not going to give you a specific endorsement of a candidate, but we are going to provide information in the following ways. One, we have a pledge. It's on our website. And we are going to ask citizens that agree with that pledge. It's on our homepage. You just have to scroll down a bit. If you agree with that pledge, present it to your candidate. Ask them to sign it and get it notarized. If they refuse, boy, that tells you something. Other things you can do. If you find a candidate that you really support, volunteer. Tell them that you'll buy a sign and put it in your yard. A lot of the citizen candidates that are running this year have very small budgets. That's a huge way you can help. Encourage your friends to do the same. Don't get a free sign, pay for it so they can spend that money doing something else. These are small budget campaigns. Volunteer to make phone calls or wave a sign as you get into election season on a street corner. Believe it or not, it impacts people. Contact the candidate and tell them you want to help. It's the way you make your voice heard. If you're not running for office, you help to select who's going to be in office. It's not just voting, it's the whole thing. Invite them for coffee and get to know them first. Ask them questions. And then when you find the person you agree with, stand behind them and do everything you can to help them get elected. What else can you do? Public meetings, we've talked about that. Go to them, speak, listen, learn, share them with your friends. Go as a group. Go out for lunch afterwards. I mean, Baton Rouge actually has some fun restaurants, and there's tons of parking, so don't be afraid. Just go. The drive gets shorter the more you make it. One big thing that we can do is begin to hold our elected officials accountable. That means that when they do something, we need to know why and we should contact them. We are lucky enough in the North Shore to have some pretty good representatives and state senators who will answer your phone calls, especially if you're courteous, if you don't leave screaming messages. It's not the best way to get them to call you back. But if you're courteous, there's some really good people that are in office here. And I'll tell you what, you know what's interesting? They can't know everything about everything. There's no way for them to. So if you find that they're making wrong decisions in your opinion, arm yourself with the facts and then set up a meeting with them and talk and ask them why they're taking the position that they're taking. So this is where the Convention of States, Louisiana Save Our Schools, I think this is where the vision is the same, and it shows that kind of my roots, I came from Convention of States. I really believe change begins at the local level. I believe it's the most powerful, most influential place in our lives because they make all the decisions about what we can do in our daily lives pretty much. And if they don't, they're going to become somebody who does someday. That's where all politicians come from. They don't just appear out of nowhere. So get to know your local people. You don't have to know everybody. Just pick one. Form a relationship, get to know them, and be a person of influence around them. I know from experience that if you politely harass enough, they start to listen. I always do it politely, unless they are somebody who does not deserve courtesy. I put those people in special categories. Those are liars. Like actual real liars. I don't really deal with the governor, so I deal with to me, it's not a party thing. To me, it's really just, do you do what you say you're going to do? And if you didn't, I always call them and ask why first. I never make assumptions, because there's sometimes just real good reasons for what they did. And it's interesting to find that out. Okay, the last place that I'm going to suggest that you get involved, and perhaps the most pressing, is Title IX. I've explained to you the problems with the Title IX proposal. I want you to know that as a citizen of this country, a resident of this state, you have the ability to provide feedback, and it is desperately needed. Every unique comment must be responded to before that proposal can become official. It must be responded to in the record. Now, remember I said unique comment, okay? And thoughtful, intelligent, right? I had some questions earlier about a couple of pieces. The Attorney General of Louisiana, along with many other Attorney Generals, have filed suit in court to stop the proposal. An injunction has been issued. It's a temporary situation, I can assure you. It will end up in the Supreme Court. What they're arguing is public. The case is public. The letter is public. We have some of it on our website. We're in the process of getting it all on our website. So if you want an easy place to find everything, you could go there. It's under Calls to Action, Title IX. But you can also just Google it. Those letters are everywhere. And the case and the Attorney General's letter outlines some of the best reasons that you could cite in a comment on Title IX, right? Because they go through the problems that they're suing on. One of them is the idea that you should legislate such vast changes in Title IX, not do it through a regulatory process. That should sound familiar to Convention of States folks, because we should not be ruled by bureaucrats. The legislature is there to make laws. They don't like to do it these days because everybody does it for them. But it's their job. And that's actually one of the points that the AGs put into their case, is this vast of a change should be done through the legislative process. They are completely rewriting everything about Title IX. Of course, then there's the whole preponderance of evidence issue, which led to the kangaroo courts previously. There's the right to hold deeply held beliefs and be protected. Currently, the proposal only exempts religious institutions, and you have to really prove that you are a religious institution. Just your name is not enough. You actually have to be able to show in your religion where the proposal will violate your beliefs. They're making it as hard as they can. So there are things about it that are really legitimate points to object to. And then further, if you have a personal story, if you have a family member who has been trained or told by a school that they can't, they can't ignore what a student wants to be called. You think that's not happening in Louisiana? We stopped a training that was happening in Ascension Parish that was doing exactly that. We exposed it. And then I called a legislator. That's that truth. But the transparency piece, we only found out about it because somebody reported it. So this stuff is happening here. Do not hesitate to take up the charge on this, because it is happening. The two key things I need you to remember with a Title IX comment are this. Please quote the docket number. When you click the button to comment on our website, it will take you directly to the Federal Register's site. And the docket number is listed in a green box next to it. Okay? That docket number prevents the Title IX proposal folks at the Department of Education from ignoring your comment. They're not supposed to ignore it, but it's just another brick in the wall. Then, the next thing you want to do is you want to be extremely clear on what you want them to do. I want you to keep the definition of sex as it was prior to this proposal. I want you to keep the 2020 rule, that was Betsy DeVos' system, in place. So be very, very clear. Remember that if you say keep the definition of sex, male and female, that may not work because they've changed the definitions of those too. So again, be as clear as you possibly can, okay? Redundantly clear. Okay? Those are the keys to a Title IX comment.
Knowing all this,
Yes.
do you have any thought about providing any prototype language?
Yes. We've talked about it. The problem we have with using a script, so that I'm part of a coalition that nationally it's over 160 groups and lawyers and people at this point. Sometimes I get on these calls and I think, I don't belong on this call. But we talked about using a script.
I'm not suggesting a script because too many of the same scripts go in.
They don't pay attention to them.
But keywords, key phrases.
Yes. So we did put out a bunch of media with some of those things, and what we're going to do is we're going to, on our call to action, so we're a very small organization, and pretty much I pay for almost everything. We've had a few donations, but it's privately funded, so very limited resources, and I do the website. So I'm working on putting on that Title IX page those key words, key points, which is, it will be the things from the AG's suit. It'll also be some of the other resources that we have. Because I agree with you. What you need to give people is almost, my partner Jillian and I were laughing. We said, we wish we could have Title IX Mad Libs. Pick an adjective, pick a noun, fill this in. But it's probably too much work. So we thought it would be funny. Those are some of the things you can do to push back. Some of the most pressing issues that are happening right now, all are waiting for you to participate in. Yes?
Would you be willing to talk about Jody Horton's bill?
Yes, and I meant to tie it all into that. So you understand there has been a little bit of a theme to everything I've talked about tonight? Okay, thank you. Representative Jody Horton presented a bill last legislative session, number 837, HB 837. I was sitting in the committee room when it was brought. It broke my heart because we kind of knew what was going to happen, but Jody withdrew it after a grueling day of testimony. She withdrew it because there was no support to push it through on the committee. There are only a few staunch conservatives on the committee, and those are the only people who are going to take a risk to vote for something like that. It is a partisan issue, much as you wish it wasn't. Jody's bill would have done very similar things to the bill that Florida passed. It would have prevented classroom discussion initiated by the teacher, the educator, on sexual orientation. There was no specificity on that. It was just sexual orientation. So you could be coming at it from any side you want. It was particularly targeted at the young grades. This had nothing to do with the health class or any of those things. It was look, teachers don't bring your personal lives into the classroom and share it with your students. Somebody said, well, what if the kid asks a question? Teachers are allowed to answer students' questions. This was a big first step in stopping what is happening in some of our schools. I'm sorry, Caddo Parish is having a huge issue with a music teacher in an elementary school who has TikTok videos that nobody should see. She was actually featured on, her TikTok videos were on, well, they did after the Advocate and Caddo sent it to them. But who's the guy online? He has a radio program and the online, he's kind of a young guy with a kind of a sharp, Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro actually featured her video. Yeah, Louisiana got that call out. Very inappropriate. It's just wildly inappropriate. She's published pictures. I don't even know who they have published pictures. I don't know what her original sex was and what she is now. I get confused of her transition. I'm being serious. I'm not trying to be facetious. I know that came across sarcastic, but I truly do. I can't remember. So she published pictures of her post-surgery, surgical pictures on her TikTok, which last year she encouraged students to follow her on. Is this happening in Louisiana? Yeah. Do we mostly have amazing teachers? Yes. The vast majority of teachers in this state are amazing people, but they need us to back them up.
Amen.
Talk about Monzel's bill, SB.
Myself, yeah, Fairness in Women's Sports.
Yeah.
Fairness in Women's Sports is currently not going to be impacted by the Title IX proposal because they're going to deal with sports later. We believe what they're doing, as do all the other lawyers that have looked at this, that they are going to establish this and then it's just going to be fait accompli that sports, well, you can't do what you're doing. Part of it's going to depend on how much pushback there is, but ultimately this has to go to the Supreme Court. The AG's case, which is currently in Federal Circuit Court, has to go to the Supreme Court. They have to accept it, they have to hear it, they have to rule on it. That's at least a year away, folks.
And on her other bill, 131, which was the one in high school and college, we're not.
That one I didn't deal with as much. I will tell you this. There are some protections that were passed at the legislature this year that could be very significant. I'll have to take a look at that bill.
It didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, well then that's why I didn't.
Well,
yeah.
I talked to her and I said about it.
Yeah. She's going to do it again, I'm sure. She's not a quitter.
Yeah.
From the pornography standpoint, Jody Horton's bill is the starting place, okay? So we stop the conversation, we stop creating the interest in the students. The next step is the local involvement of drawing attention to other parents that some of these books are in the school libraries. The problem is, how do you get to a school library? That's where you can issue public information requests. And if you want to do something like that, let us know and we can help you with that. I know Convention of States is going to be working on that. We're going to be working together actually to try to create a database of information, particularly pertaining to Jody Horton's bill. There are topics that shouldn't, as I've discussed ad nauseum, shouldn't be in school libraries. But if you don't know they're there, why would you object? It's not a matter of censoring the book.
Jennifer, the librarian, is that how's it?
Those in the school system, those are just hired. It's just a hired position.
Does the school board have any say?
Yeah, so the school board does have say over absolutely everything, even when they tell you they don't.
I'm talking about the one at the top. The one that's pushing it.
Well,
How do you get it?
that's a private association, and so changing what she's doing isn't going to be possible. But by removing her, because somebody else will just take her shoes. What you do is you make it untenable for them to do what they're doing. Focus on thinking of your parish, your local school, this state as a place where we're building a wall. We're saying this is not going to happen here anymore. Not here. I can't fix everywhere else, but here I can make a difference. Local, local, local.
And so there's no way we could get a legislator to get a...
No, because it's a private association. And it starts to tread into some First Amendment issues that we may not want to. Local school systems have the ability to make those decisions already, and we are a locally controlled state. We believe that it's a principle of limited government that you are locally controlled. Your school board votes for all of the positions that get hired for. They have to give their affirmation to those. Usually it's just like the whole raft, but there's nothing stopping them from saying, hey, hold up. There's somebody on this list I have a concern about. Could you tell me their qualifications? Now they can do that privately. They don't have to do it on public television. These are people who live in the community. But we need to start expecting our school board to do their job. It has become a rubber stamp board, not just here, everywhere, for the superintendents. And that's too much power in one person's hands because they're not elected. They're appointed by the school board. So, by the way, you can change your superintendent anytime. Take a look at their contract and take them out if you have control of the school board. And oh, by the way, who controls the school board? We do. But school board attorneys have a lot of say too. So if I was going to put together Jen's hit list, for those that are listening that shouldn't be, that does not mean I wish any harm to come to those people. I think the school board attorneys need to have their powers deeply curtailed, and I think we need new school board attorneys. Right now, in the state of Louisiana, we have one company basically representing every school board in the state. Not a lot of diversity of thought there.
So you're talking about the school board attorneys in each parish?
Mm-hmm. Same company all over the state.
It's one law
One
firm?
law firm.
Which law firm?
Hammond and Sills, I think is what they call themselves, and other variations.
It must be headquartered in Baton Rouge.
Probably. It's not something I've spent a lot of time on because other people do, and I just...
And are they left activists?
I don't know what they are, but the ones I've run across are rude and incompetent. I had one of them tell me that it was perfectly acceptable and there was no conflict of interest for a superintendent of a school system to be the person who determined whether there was any evidence of abuse on a videotape that only the superintendent could see. Abuse by a teacher in the school system. That's the cameras in the classrooms policy, by the way, that every school system has passed. And I scratched my head and I said, how can there not be a conflict of interest? The superintendent represents the system and they're the only person that gets to view the tape and determine if there's any evidence before the parent can see it? They said, well, I went to law school and blah, blah, blah. I got a nice lecture. I was like, okay, I'm just looking at basic facts.
Are you chasing anything as far as school, the money following the students?
We don't get involved except to say parents should have the right to make the decisions for their children's best educational opportunities. From that perspective, we support school choice. We do not get involved in the finer details of it unless we see something that is alarming, because there are organizations that are really specializing in that. If you have a passion for that issue, the Pelican Institute has really taken a lead on that. That's an organization, it's a big one, that's done a lot with it.
I worked with my representative on her bill, but it never got hit.
None of them did, yeah, well, a couple of them, a couple of little ones did.
Hers was too far.
My understanding is that bill was actually shelved in order that the smaller bills would pass. It was
a test.
Yes.
Because Laura's bill never made it.
Yeah, Representative Schlegel Representative Schlegel's bill would have given school choice, money follow the child policy for basically every situation, every student.
I thought it was basic.
But that is a broad. There was another one too, by the way, that never even got heard by Representative Garofalo that did the same thing, written a little different. But that one didn't get heard. Representative Garofalo's bills don't get heard anymore.
Madison's bill was the one that we thought might make it.
Yeah. Again, not something I track as much. Transparency, curriculum transparency, professional development transparency, we really believe that needs to happen so that everybody can know what's happening. We really push on those issues, behavior and discipline, legislation, that kind of stuff. So, can I answer any specific questions or anything? Yes.
Tell us about gay flags flying at schools.
Okay, well, I don't know about gay flags flying at schools generally in the broad sense, but I will tell you that at Ascension Parish Dutchtown High School, they did an International Trans Appreciation Day or International Day of Awareness. I don't know what the whole thing was. It was like International Trans Day Awareness, I think was what it technically was. They have a GSA club there, which is the Gay Straight Alliance. There are GSA clubs all over the state. They're probably here in St. Anne. Sorry. GSA. And they had on that day a campaign initiated by one of their AP teachers to have the teachers wear pins that would display their personal pronouns. And it was the pink and white and blue flag. And that's the transgender flag. So, yes, you're seeing this absolutely in certain school systems. Jefferson Parish did a $10,000 grant from It Gets Better. And they used that to develop professional development materials for inclusivity for LGBTQ students. So they're going to train their teachers. They said it's okay because they're not training the students. I was like, well, what are you training the teachers to do? You're training the teachers to train the students.
What are the nuts and bolts of how a book like that gets in the library or curriculum in the classroom?
So, two very different things. There are classroom libraries, there are media centers, and there are school libraries, so from the book's perspective. A book can be donated. East Baton Rouge Parish had a huge donation last year, the beginning of the year, I think it was, from Conscious Kids. That's a group that's devoted to diversity. And so lots of books like this would have probably been part of that donation. Getting the list of books from a donation is all but impossible because they will tell you that they don't write them down, they don't have time, they don't have to track it. They just bring them and see which teachers want them in their classrooms or, because of course teachers can put books in their classroom libraries, and as far as we have seen, there's not oftentimes a lot of pushback unless the public becomes aware of it. Okay, then, for example, here in St. Tammany, if the public becomes aware of it, in particular if our group becomes aware of it, usually once people have started chatting about it enough, I can call Superintendent Jabbia, and he is extremely responsive. I will give him that. So there was a teacher in Slidell that showed a video to an elementary classroom. The parents reported it on social media. Again, that's fine, but I wish you would go to our website and give us a real report because we can act on it better. Yes?
As a taxpayer, is anyone allowed to go into the libraries or schools and just...
No. Schools have a no visitation policy that they instituted during COVID, and they're continuing to do that in a lot of schools for different reasons. For instance, in Calcasieu Parish, they're not letting parents do any tours at the middle school with their new students because there's construction.
A lot of excuses then.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been construction. It's never been an issue until this year. It is becoming more and more difficult. It is extremely important that as the public who's paying and footing the bill, that if they're not going to make these places transparent and accountable to us, that we go and voice our disapproval of having policies that prevent the public from going in. Now here's the thing. Why do they want you to only come and parent-teachers nights? Well, because they can clean things up. That's reality. They don't want you to come in and see the Black Lives Matter flag on the teacher's wall. Yet, there are high schools in this parish that have had that happen. Yes?
So this is all about creating activists to bring down the country? I mean, what's the point? That's all.
Of why they're doing it?
Yeah, what's the point?
I think that that's probably part of it. I think it's transformation. It is socialism in some of the groups. It's collectivism more in others. I don't know. I don't know. It's just dark.
I didn't know what it was until I was in high school.
I got to be honest. I think the transformation of society, once we go to a certain point, it's not going to get rolled back no matter who we elect.
It's breaking down to their Christian values, too.
Which are the bedrock.
Yeah.
The bedrock of our foundational, our governing documents. Yeah. Listen, I am available. My business card is back there. That's my personal phone number. I try to keep kind of office hours unsuccessfully. Mostly for the benefit of my marriage. 28 years is a long time to put into something, and so.
What are those office hours?
I try very hard to be done by 5 o'clock. With the general public, I am always on the phone after that, but I try to keep that to appointments that I've made specifically. But you are always welcome to text or email, because I know how to turn things off. I've had to learn.
Hey, Jennifer, I understand that this is nationwide.
Yes, ma'am.
Because of the money.
Right.
Is it worldwide?
Yes.
This is going on.
It is absolutely. A lot of this we see, and of course I don't speak Dutch, so it's hard, but I had somebody hand me a Dutch company the other day, and I was like, thank you. I don't know what to do with this because I can't speak the language. But yeah, it's worldwide. A lot of it did start here, though.
Remember when Obama said he wanted to fundamentally transform America?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. But it's been going on a lot longer. He just kind of put it out there for everybody to see.
Basically, this is right.
Yeah. When I used to speak for convention estates, I used to talk about the pillars that our government is based on. Can anybody name any of those? Well, there's religion. First of all, okay, there was a belief in the Founding Fathers that we as a nation would have a pervasive morality and understanding of faith. What else?
Okay, I've been to most of these meetings, and in closing, I'd like to say that you're here tonight because if not you, who?
Yeah.
Now you have to go home, and you have to call your relatives, your friends, and say, did you know? Talk about some of the disgusting things that young lady was just talking about.
Sorry.
Mention it to them and say, you have grandkids, you have children. Remember that. Also,
you can share it. That's right. And please know, so those pillars, that's our Constitution. It's our choice of government, our vote. It's our worldview, our religious beliefs. And the fourth one my brain has just blanked on. Okay, anyway. But they're there in the founding documents. So I need you to remember that as you leave tonight, that this is not hopeless, that you're getting involved and will bring this back around to the actual focus. And then if you have education questions, we're here for you. Okay?
Jennifer, thank you so much.